A person stands at a checkout line, staring at the total on the screen. They glance at their credit card, then back at the screen, visibly shocked. The person remembers buying the same items 3 years ago for much less. People in line grumble and blame the store, the supply chain, or the president. A dollar bill is waved in the air, drawing attention to its physical presence. The narrator points out that while people argue about prices, few ask why the dollar's value is falling. Most people believe money is valuable because the government says so. The narrator questions the idea that money is backed by trust or gold. A flashback sequence hints at a secret meeting on a boat in 1945. A handshake between powerful figures is shown, symbolizing a historic agreement. Scenes of military conflict unfold, illustrating decades of global tension. A montage shows Americans enjoying a subsidized lifestyle over 50 years. A bill arrives, symbolizing the end of the subsidized era. An infographic plays, setting the tone for the video. Nick returns to center frame, looking relaxed but energetic. Nick introduces himself and his obsession with invisible economic forces. Nick encourages viewers to subscribe and like the video. Nick promises to explore why savings lose value every year. Nick stands in front of a whiteboard ready to explain. Nick says understanding high rent and grocery bills requires understanding the petrodollar. Nick jokes about the petrodollar sounding boring, urging viewers to stay engaged. Nick claims the petrodollar is the reason people trade their lives for a weak currency. A transition takes viewers back to 1944. World War II scenes depict global chaos and uncertainty. Global leaders gather at Bretton Woods for a pivotal meeting. Map highlights Bretton Woods as the location of the conference. Leaders agree to make the US dollar the world reserve currency. The US is shown with vast reserves of gold. A contract is signed. All currencies are backed by the dollar, and the dollar is backed by gold. An animation shows $35 exchanging for 1 ounce of gold. The system appears solid and reliable. Politicians begin spending beyond their means. Scenes of the Vietnam War and social programs illustrate massive spending. Printing presses churn out more dollars than there is gold to back them. A metaphorical checkbook shows checks written for $10,000 with only $1,000 in the bank. Foreign countries start to notice the imbalance. France sends ships loaded with paper dollars to New York. French officials demand gold bars in exchange for dollars. US officials panic as gold reserves dwindle. A vault is shown emptying rapidly. President Nixon appears on TV to announce the suspension of dollar-gold convertibility. A visual overlay of Nixon's speech plays. Nick sarcastically comments on the word temporarily. Overnight, the dollar transforms into a fiat currency. A graphic shows the dollar backed by nothing. Foreign countries are depicted holding billions of US dollars looking concerned. Yesterday, their dollars were as good as gold. Today, just paper. Foreign officials debate whether to sell their dollars and crash the US economy. The US scrambles to find a new anchor for the dollar. A dark, dramatic scene introduces the blood-soaked agreement. President FDR boards the USS Quincy, preparing for a historic meeting. King Abdulaziz arrives on the USS Quincy, greeted by American officials. FDR and King Abdulaziz sit together, discussing terms over tea. A handshake seals the agreement between the United States and Saudi Arabia. American military personnel are shown providing security for Saudi royalty. U.S. troops and weapons are delivered to Saudi Arabia, reinforcing the alliance. Saudi officials nod in approval as the U.S. guarantees the king's power. Saudi oil fields operate, with workers extracting oil under the watchful eye of U.S. advisors. Contract is signed. Saudi Arabia agrees to price oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. Montage of oil tankers leaving Saudi ports with dollar signs superimposed. A timeline flashes. 1971. The gold window closes, changing the global financial landscape. U.S. currency is printed in large quantities. Stacks of dollars pile up. Nick stands at a board, writing $= OIL in bold letters. Nick explains that every country needs oil, gesturing to a world map. Japanese factories churn out goods, highlighting their need for oil. German autobahns and factories, emphasizing Germany's oil dependency. Italian workers produce pasta and Ferraris, representing their exports. Italy attempts to buy oil with lira, but is refused by Saudi Arabia. Italian officials exchange goods with the U.S. to obtain U.S. dollars. Italy uses US dollars to purchase oil from Saudi Arabia. A visual flowchart shows goods moving from Italy to the US, dollars moving to Saudi Arabia, and oil returning to Italy. Central banks around the world stockpile US dollars, creating global demand. A globe spins, with dollar bills orbiting around it. US government officials print more money, confident in the dollar's stability. Nick leans into the camera, explaining the concept of exorbitant privilege. US exports inflation globally, with dollar bills dispersing across continents. Wars are funded, soldiers march, and military equipment is deployed using printed dollars. Stimulus checks are distributed to American families. Milk prices in Ohio remain stable, while inflation is absorbed worldwide. Nick emphasizes the cost. Trillions spent on the military-industrial complex. US jets fly over the Middle East, enforcing the oil-dollar agreement. Scenes of conflict and regime change in the region, showing the price of stability. Nick sits at a desk, looking at his laptop, and then addressing the audience. Concerned American family reviews their 401k statements. Nick asks, "Why should you care?" Saudi officials announce openness to trading oil and other currencies. A news graphic shows Saudi Arabia considering the Chinese yuan for oil sales. BRICS leaders meet, discussing alternatives to the dollar. Digital graphic compares BRICS GDP to G7 GDP over time. Nick presents a chart. G7's share of global GDP drops from 46% to 30%. BRICS nations' GDP surpasses the G7, signaling a shift in global power. Central bankers in China, Japan, and Saudi Arabia contemplate their dollar reserves. Stacks of US dollars sit in foreign central banks, uncertain of their future. A worried economist predicts the dollars will come home to the US. A flood of dollars returns to the US, overwhelming the market. The value of the dollar drops sharply, depicted by a falling graph. Prices for gas, food, housing, and imports rise dramatically in American stores. Families struggle with skyrocketing costs, looking distressed at receipts. Nick warns of a fundamental repricing of the American standard of living. A final montage shows the global ripple effects, chaos in markets, worried citizens, and a world rethinking its financial future. A visual representation of normalcy bias, with people ignoring warning signs of disaster. A crowd of people looking calm and unconcerned as chaos subtly brews in the background. A person looking at their bank account on a phone, feeling reassured by the stability they've always known. Historical currencies appear, the Roman denarius, Dutch guilder, and British pound sterling, each fading away in sequence. A timeline shows the average lifespan of world reserve currencies 80 to 100 years. A clock ticks, highlighting year 80 of the Bretton Woods era. Calendar flips to year 53 of the pure fiat experiment. A sense of urgency builds as the timeline approaches the present day, hinting at an impending reset. Nick wipes a whiteboard clean, erasing all previous notes. Nick writes the solution in big bold letters on the board. Nick faces the audience, acknowledging the fear his words have caused. A person anxiously checks their bank account, imagining it turning into monopoly money. A visual of the phrase "panic pays no dividends" appears as people panic around a stock ticker. A split screen. One side shows a crowd hoarding cash, the other side shows a single person thinking differently. Nick introduces the concept of the minority mindset. A group of people sits on piles of cash, looking worried as inflation eats away at their savings. A graph shows cash earning 0.01% interest, with inflation rising much faster. A visual of the dollar bill shrinking as inflation increases. Nick points to the words "bet on value" on the whiteboard. A crowd bets on the dollar, while a few individuals look for alternative assets. A dramatic image of the blood-soaked agreement fading away. A globe shows the dollar losing its dominance with other currencies rising. Nick presents the three-step playbook to protect against de-dollarization. Step 1. Own the producers, not the currency appears on screen. A person holds a stock certificate, which transforms into a factory producing toothpaste. A company continues to sell toothpaste as the price in dollars increases. A graph shows stock prices rising with inflation. A person moves some cash into S&P 500 or solid companies, looking more confident. Step 2. The real estate hedge appears on screen. A person buys a $100,000 rental property, putting $20,000 down. A bank hands over $80,000 as a loan, visualized with stacks of cash. Inflation hits 10%, and the property value rises to $110,000. A chart shows a $10,000 gain on a $20,000 investment, a 50% return. A tenant hands rent money to the property owner who uses it to pay the mortgage. A graph shows rent rising with inflation, while the mortgage stays fixed. The asset value and rental income float upward as inflation increases. Step 3. True money. Gold and Bitcoin appears on screen. A gold bar and a Bitcoin symbol appear side by side. Central banks are shown buying gold at record rates. A vault fills with gold bars, representing security and stability. Bitcoin is depicted as a digital answer to the printing press, with a fixed supply counter. No CEO or central authority is shown for Bitcoin, emphasizing its decentralized nature. A person allocates 5 to 10% of their net worth into gold and Bitcoin, visualized as insurance for their house. A house stands safe during a financial storm, protected by gold and Bitcoin. Nick moves closer to the camera for the closing monologue. The words "the agreement that gave the dollar its value is fading" appear as the dollar fades in the background. The world is shown moving on, with new currencies and assets rising. People react in different ways: anger, denial, and preparation. A herd of people follows each other off a cliff, while a few break away to safety. People keeping money in the bank look worried as their savings shrink, as a single stream of income dries up, leaving people stranded. A government official prints more money, which only worsens the problem. A feedback loop of destruction is visualized, with money printing causing inflation, leading to more printing. A person stands tall as the CEO of their own life, converting currency into living assets. A clock shows time passing, emphasizing the importance of not getting poor slowly. The standard outro screen appears. Nick invites the audience to comment on the future of the dollar. A prompt to check out the next video on real estate analysis appears. Nick signs off with "Keep hustling."